أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين. Inshallah, we'll be starting in just a couple of minutes. Okay, we'll go ahead and start inshallah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين واللعنة الدائمة على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. For the love of our beloved Prophet and his beloved progeny, please recite a loud salawat. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. For the hastening in the return of our beloved 12th Imam, let's take a moment to recite another loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajahum. I hope everyone is doing well, inshallah. As we normally do Friday nights, we will be going through the tafsir of, or the continuation of the tafsir of Surah Yusuf. As we always do, I will do a quick review of what we have discussed up until this point, because we've had quite a bit of a gap since last Friday. And then once we're done with the review, I will continue, inshallah, with the story of Yusuf alayhi salam. We reached this point in the story where Yusuf alayhi salam, he was brought out of prison. And when he was brought out of the prison, the king told him, or the king told the people around him, وَقَالَ الْمَلِكُ أُتُونِي بِهِ أَسْتَخْلِصْهُ لِنَفْسِي. He told the people around him to bring Yusuf towards him, because he wanted to make Yusuf the right-hand man and essentially wanted to have him around. We mentioned that this was because not only Yusuf was able to interpret the dream of the king, but beyond that, he was also able to essentially provide a solution for him. Okay. Having done that, the king brought him out of the prison, and we read from the verses of the Quran that when Yusuf came and sat with the king, they started to speak to one another. فَلَمَّا كَلَّمَهُ. When they started to speak to one another, the king turned to him and said, إِنَّكَ الْيَوْمَ لَدَيْنَا مَكِينٌ أَمِينٌ. You have a very honorable position when it comes to us, and you are also trustworthy in our eyes. Yusuf alayhi salam took advantage of this opportunity because he knew that this drought was going to come, because he knew that this difficult moment and this difficult time was going to come to the people of Egypt. He said, قَالَ جَعَلْنِي عَلَى خَزَائِنِ الْأَرْضِ. He said, why don't you make me in charge of this project? Why don't you make me in charge of this task force that is going to go and prepare for the drought that is going to hit the people of Egypt? And the story doesn't mention this, but the king, of course, accepted what he had to say. We said, and this is what we discussed last session, we said that in this idea and in this concept of Yusuf alayhi salam accepting this responsibility, but also going about planning and strategizing how he was going to tackle this issue of the drought, we said that in this there is a huge lesson for us, because Yusuf alayhi salam didn't take on a responsibility and just rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take care of it. He didn't take on this responsibility and just hope and wish for the best, which is normally what we do. No, you find that Yusuf alayhi salam, he took on this responsibility and then he started to plan. And his planning was very, very much detailed. It was very complex. It was taking everything into consideration. And we said when you look in the life of the Prophet of ours, when you look at the life of Imam al-Hussein in particular, Imam Ali, any of these individuals that you look at, you find that this was a seerah, it was a constant practice in their life, that when they wanted to go about a certain task, they didn't just rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a superficial manner. They wouldn't just sit there and hope and wish for the best. We went through the battle of Uhud and how the Prophet strategized for that. And of course, the results did not show themselves in that battle for obvious reasons, because of the Muslims not acting upon what the Prophet had asked them to do. So we know that from the story. But the reality is that the Prophet had planned properly for that situation. Now, whether the Muslims act upon it or don't act upon it, that's of course a different factor. That's not in the hands of the Prophet. But you find that our Prophet and our Imams made it a point, and this is a lesson to be learned, that we are to plan for our future. We are to plan for different things. Even when you want to bring about change, you want to bring about reform, anything that you want to do, you have to sit and plan for it. It's not as simple as sitting there and saying, inshallah, things will fall into place. Inshallah, He will take care of things. No, you have to rely on Him, but then you have to sit down and plan and strategize. This is what Yusuf alayhi salam did. When he took over the authority of being the head of the task force that was going to get the people of Egypt through this drought, what did he do? Did he sit there and say, I will rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? No, he started to plan. He started to strategize. Now, I will share this hadith with you because it puts it very beautifully in terms of how Yusuf alayhi salam went about things. And this hadith is also a response to that question that we posed in the previous session. And that was this, that if the king is a king, and he's not even supposed to be in charge technically, because when you have a prophet, the prophet is the one who's supposed to have authority. Why is Yusuf asking a king for authority? Why is Yusuf alayhi salam going under the umbrella of a king who is naturally, because he's not supposed to be in charge, he is unjust because of that? Why is Yusuf alayhi salam working under this king? Okay, this hadith explains how Yusuf alayhi salam went about things in terms of really bringing equality or equity I should say, to the people of Egypt through the way he was going to deal with this drought. And when you understand this hadith, then you understand why Yusuf alayhi salam was even willing to do this in the first place. Because you might ask, why is he working with this unjust king? But when you look at the way he brought about equality, the way he brought about equity, I should say, to be more precise, you find that what he did, there was a greater good behind it. There was a greater purpose behind it. In this hadith we read that Yusuf alayhi salam, in the 7 years that there was a drought, every year he was selling the wheat to the people for different prices, number one. And by doing this, by charging those people who were more wealthy within the society, he was trying to bring towards the government and towards the main resource in the country of Egypt or in the region of Egypt. He was bringing all of the resources back into one place so that by the time that the drought is over and everything is now going to go back to normal, that during that time, then he could essentially share these resources. He could divide these resources in an equal manner. So what you find in the hadith is this. He says, the first year that I was selling the wheat, the first year of the drought, right? And imagine when you don't have food and there's a drought, whether you're the richest man on earth or you're the poorest man on earth or you're middle class, it doesn't matter. You need your food, right? When a drought comes, it doesn't differentiate between the one who's very wealthy and the one who's very poor. So everyone is in need. So everyone is coming to Yusuf alayhi salam and essentially begging him for the wheat. Okay, what did Yusuf do? Yusuf says, the first year I sold the wheat to the dirham and the dinar. What is the dirham and the dinar? Is the, the common currency that people would have at that time. Normal money that people would have at time. Okay, that was the first year. The second year, what he did was, he said, I will now sell wheat to jewelry. If you have jewelry, which is different from the dirham and dinar, which is a currency, if you have jewelry, now you bring your jewelry, your gold, your silver. And of course, those who are wealthier, they have more gold and more silver. And so it seems as though Yusuf alayhi salam was charging them a little bit higher prices than he was charging the poor. Because if he was buying or selling based on jewelry, then you would have assumed that the poor people would have not had that jewelry. Okay, so Yusuf alayhi salam says, in the second year, I started to sell the wheat, but instead of taking dirham and dinar, I started to take in lieu and in return of the wheat, I started to take jewelry instead. The third year came around. In the third year, I started to take cattle as the currency that I would accept for the wheat, because I wanted to gather as much of each and every one of these resources under the umbrella of the government so that I could then take these and divide them and share them equally. I could redistribute these resources, this wealth within the society equally. The third year, I started to buy or sell the wheat based on how much cattle someone could bring to me. The fourth year, he says, the fourth year, I started to sell the wheat based on maids and servants, people who were working for others. The masters, who each one of them might have had 100 to 200 maids and servants. If they wanted to come and buy wheat, I wouldn't just sell it to dirham and dinar. I would sell it to those maids and servants. And those maids and servants would then come to me, and I would have authority over them so that I could free them. I could redistribute them within the society. Moving on, number 5. In the fifth year, he says, I started to sell the wheat to houses, property. Sixth year, I started to sell houses to lands and farms. Okay. Seventh year, he says, I started to sell the wheat to the actual individuals in the land of Egypt. Meaning that if there was a master, this master, up until this point, the first year he has sold off all of his dirham and dinar. Second year he's given up his cattle. Third year he's given up his maid and his servants. Fourth year his property, on and on and on. By the eighth year or the end of the seventh year, he has nothing. So what did Yusuf alayhi salam do? He started to sell wheat by buying that individual, that master who had maids and servants. You want wheat? No problem, I will give you that wheat. But now you have to be under my authority. And then the hadith says that he then took all of these resources and he redistributed them within the society that he was living in fairly and in a just manner. Okay, this is the strategizing that Yusuf alayhi salam was doing. Moving on from that, then the story moves on to when the brothers of Yusuf came to speak to him. The brothers of Yusuf came to speak to him, and the Quran says, فَعَرَفَهُمْ وَهُمْ لَهُ مُنْكِرُونَ, that Yusuf alayhi salam was able to recognize that these are my brothers, but they were not able to recognize that this is Yusuf alayhi salam. So he came up with a plan, and this plan was set up in such a way that he wanted to make sure that these brothers, even without them knowing that this is Yusuf, that he could get his younger brother from Canaan to Egypt, so that he could take his younger brother away from his father. And as we went through these verses, we posed a very important question. And essentially, if you look at the whole story of Prophet Yusuf, this part of it is a part that we never really ask a question about. Why is it that Yusuf tried to come up with this portion? Why is it that he tried to come up with this idea that let me try to get Binyamin from Canaan to where I am? If he wants to meet up with his father, if he wants to get to see his father, if he wants to teach his brothers a lesson, getting Binyamin from Canaan to Egypt has nothing to do with any of these things. He doesn't need to do that for any of these things. And yet, you find that he is planning and strategizing. And in fact, the planning and strategizing is so detailed that a number of the verses of the Quran are dedicated to what? To explaining how Yusuf alayhi salam was able, essentially, to get his younger brother to stay with him in the land of Egypt and have the brothers go back still while they did not know that this king or this high-ranking official is actually Yusuf alayhi salam. Why is it that Yusuf alayhi salam is coming up with this plan? That's a question that usually doesn't come to our mind when we're studying the story of Yusuf alayhi salam. We said the answer to this question is this, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, while He wants Yaqub and Yusuf to reconnect, while He wants them to see one another again, but at the same time, He wants to test the patience of Yaqub even more. See, Yaqub is already, his patience is already being tested to the fullest extent, right? To the greatest extent, because his Yusuf hasn't been around for years and years now, and that has left a scar and a mark on his heart. There's no doubt about that. But now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because He sees His servant being so patient, He wants to elevate him even more. And in this there is a lesson for us, meaning that sometimes when we are going through difficulties and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees our difficulty, He might even add to your difficulty at times. And this is a scary thing that I'm saying, because going through difficulties, dealing with difficulties, they're not easy. It's very difficult. But having said that, if you understand what's happening here in the story, as much as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with Yaqub, He is now going to make his life even more difficult, which is very much, unconventional, which is very much unlike what we would assume Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would do. We would always assume that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees His servant struggling, His response would always be to do what? To remove his difficulty. But what you find in the story of Yaqub is that before He's going to remove his difficulty, He's going to make his life even more difficult. How so? By taking even that last fruit of his heart, that last thing that he is clinging on to, which is Binyamin still. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to take him away as well. And this is why you read, and when we get to the verses later on, you will see this. This is why you read in the story that Yaqub alayhi salam actually did not go blind until what happened? Until the last straw broke his back. What was that last straw? That even Binyamin was not around him anymore. That part of the story that says, وَبْيَضَّتْ عَيْنَاهُ, right? He went blind essentially. He could not see anymore because of how much he was mourning. وَهُوَ كَظِيمٌ, and still he was controlling himself, and still he was patient. That didn't happen until Binyamin was also taken away from him. And this means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to test him even more. And it seems as though Yusuf alayhi salam is part of this plan. It seems as though Yusuf alayhi salam has been commanded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make this plan actually play out and manifest itself. This is why Yusuf alayhi salam is coming up with this very elaborate plan to keep Binyamin with him, or to get Binyamin from Canaan to Egypt, still while the brothers do not know. Because if the brothers knew that this was Yusuf and Binyamin stays with Yusuf, then the brothers will go back to Yaqub and say, listen, Binyamin isn't with us, but we found Yusuf. It's not going to be a test for Yaqub anymore. So Yusuf alayhi salam is going to cover up this whole situation while the brothers go back and tell their father that even Binyamin is not with us anymore. This is why Yusuf alayhi salam is coming up with this plan in this final portion, or this final chapter of the story of his life. Okay, we reached this point that these brothers, of course, they went back. And when they were going back, Yusuf alayhi salam told them two things. First of all, he reminded them, listen, you remember how nice and kind I was to you? You remember how much when we were measuring the wheat, I didn't sell you guys short at all? I gave you all the wheat that you asked for? Okay, because of that, make sure you bring your younger brother, that younger brother that you guys were talking about. Make sure you bring him. Number one. Number two, if you don't bring him, then you know what I will do the next time? The next time, I am not going to be so nice to you. The next time, I will not even allow you to approach the gates of Egypt. وَلَا تَقْرَبُونَ. I will not even allow you to enter into Egypt. I will stop you at the gates. So he essentially showed them the con and the pro of listening to him, or essentially two pros if they were to obey him and bring Binyamin with them. So what did the brothers do? They went back to Yaqub and they said this. فَلَمَّا رَجَعُوا إِلَىٰ أَبِيهِمْ قَالُوا يَا أَبَانَا مُنِعَ مِنَّا الْكَيْلِ. When they went back to their father, they said, Father, you know what has happened? We have been given the threat. We have been told that this time, if we don't take Binyamin with us, they're not going to give us any wheat anymore. فَأَرْسِلْ مَعْنَا أَخَانَا نَكْتَلْ وَإِنَّا لَهُ لَحَافِظُونَ. So why don't you send Binyamin with us? And if Binyamin comes with us, we will be able to get a full measure of the wheat that we have been promised, and we will protect him. There's nothing for you to worry about. Now, bear in mind, this might be 20 or 30 years after the whole story of Yusuf going missing has ended. So that's important to keep in mind. So there's been 20 or 30 years that the brothers of Yusuf may have not done anything to essentially ruin the trust of their father after getting rid of Yusuf. This is why they even give themselves a permission to turn to their father and say, why don't you give us Binyamin? And if you were to give us Binyamin, we would be protectors of him. وَإِنَّا لَهُ لَحَافِظُونَ. Okay. Of course, Yaqub, he still has his suspicion. He still is suspicious. He still doesn't trust the brothers of Yusuf. So he said this, قال هل آمنكم عليه إلا كما أمنتكم على أخيه من قبل. He said, listen, you want me to trust you with Binyamin? How do you want me to trust you with him when I trusted you before with Yusuf? فَاللَّهُ خَيْرٌ حَافِظًا وَهُوَ أَرْحَمُ الرَّاحِمِينَ. But what can I do? If you guys have to go and you have to take Binyamin, and they have told you that there is no way, essentially, that we will be given wheat anymore if you don't take my younger brother or your younger brother, well then what am I going to do? I will only have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to rely on. I will only have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who is going to be the protector of your younger brother. وَهُوَ أَرْحَمُ الرَّاحِمِينَ. And he is the one who has the most mercy. He is the one who, when he tests his servants, has the most mercy when it comes to the tests that he puts in front of them. This is a difficult thing, brothers and sisters. We always have to seek the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the protection of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when you see him wanting to test you. Because the tests of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are difficult. If you and I pass a lot of the tests that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put in front of us, let's not assume that that was us. Let's not assume that we're so strong that we're able to pass these tests. No, it was him helping. But what if he were to make the test a little bit more difficult? This is why in the verses of the Quran we read that we tell Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ya Allah, do not put on our backs more than what we can carry. Do not burden us with more than what we can carry. Because if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala were to take the tests that we have in our life and make them a little bit more difficult, then all of a sudden you'll see a lot of us will flunk the test. A lot of us will not be successful in this test. And so when we do see someone who fails a test, when we do see someone who was in a situation but he did not pass the test, we are not to sit there and judge them. We are not to sit there when someone has lost a loved one, for example, and this person, God forbid, he says something that is dissatisfying with the patience that he's supposed to have. It is not incompatible with the patience he's supposed to have when it comes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That we would sit there and point to this person and say, look at this person. How weak is their faith? No, maybe if you were in that situation, you would do the exact same thing. It's not as simple as just sitting there and saying, no, I would be able to pass that test. The test you have in your own life, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala were to take them and make them a little bit more difficult, you would see a lot of us would flunk a lot of these tests. He is merciful. Yaqub alayhi salam is saying, فَاللَّهُ خَيْرٌ حَافِظًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who will protect Binyamin. He is the best of protectors. وَهُوَ أَرْحَمُ الرَّاحِمِينَ. And he is the most merciful. If he tests me with a test, he will test me with his mercy. And therefore, Yaqub is relying on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, moving on from this, when the brothers of Yusuf spoke to their father, the next step that they took is that they started to open up the things that they had brought from Egypt, the wheat that they had brought from Egypt. And as we went through the verses last week, Yusuf alayhi salam had told his people to put the money that they had purchased the wheat with back into their bags. So when they started to open up these bags, amongst the wheat that they had been given, what did they also start to find? They also started to find their own dirham and dinar. وَلَمَّا فَتَحُوا مَتَاعَهُمْ. When they started to open up their bags, وَجَدُوا بِضَاعَتَهُمْ رُدَّتْ إِلَيْهِمْ. They saw, oh my God, not only did this man give us all the wheat that we needed, he in fact returned the money that we had taken to him to buy the wheat with. So what did they do? Then they turned to their father. قَالُوا يَا أَبَانَا. Our father, مَا نَبْغِي. What else are you waiting for? هَذِهِ بِضَاعَتُنَا رُدَّتْ إِلَيْنَا. You keep telling us that you don't trust us. You keep telling us that you're doubtful about taking Binyamin. Look, the person who's in charge over there in Egypt, not only did he bring back the wheat, not only did he give us the wheat, he even gave us back the money
that we used to buy the wheat with. What would you expect from a person like this? It seems as though Yusuf alayhi salam had to do this. This had to be part of his plan, because this was one of those main things that Yusuf alayhi salam was going to use to encourage the brothers to convince their father in order for their father to give up Binyamin. If you think about it, Yaqub alayhi salam is not going to give up Binyamin easily. So what did Yusuf alayhi salam do? He planned it in two ways. The same way he planned it in two ways with his own brothers, he planned it in two ways also with Yaqub alayhi salam, indirectly trying to convince Yaqub alayhi salam. On one hand, he told the brothers to tell Yaqub that they would not be given any more wheat. And on the other hand, he returned the money that they had bought the wheat with, so that Yaqub would realize that whoever this person is out there who's in charge of the wheat in Egypt, this person, he is extremely kind. He's extremely merciful. And therefore, if I send Binyamin, then I'm sending it, and what these brothers are saying makes sense. I can trust them a little bit at least. Nonetheless, Yaqub still, he took his precautions, but it seems as though Yusuf had to do this in order for Yaqub to give up that last fruit of his heart, which was Binyamin. So what did he do? They, of course, said, مَا نَبْغِي هَذِهِ بِضَاعَتُنَا رُدَّتْ إِلَيْنَا وَنَمِيرُ أَهْلَنَا وَنَحْفَظُ أَخَانَا. Let us take him. We will bring back food for our family, and we will protect our brother. وَنَزْدَادُ كَيْلَ بَعِيرٍ ذَلِكَ كَيْلٌ يَسِيرٌ. And not only this time he will give us wheat, but because there is 11 of us rather than the 10 that we went with last time, we will get an extra kail. Kail refers to the measuring cup that they used to use back in the day. We will get an extra share of wheat because our younger brother will be there with us as well. Okay. What did Yaqub alayhi salam say in response? قَالَ لَنْ أُرْسِلَهُ مَعَكُمْ حَتَّى تُؤْتُونِ مَوْثِقًا مِّنَ اللَّهِ. He said, you know what? I'm not going to be able to send Binyamin so that you guys would take him unless you guys give me a promise. Now, Yaqub has seen signs that kind of suggest that what these brothers are saying, there's truth to it, because the biggest sign is the fact that the money that they had bought the wheat with is back in their bags again. So this shows that whoever this person is, it seems as though what he's saying is very truthful. What the brothers are saying is very true, because otherwise, why would they have their money back? Who would give the money back? Unless the king or the person who was in charge, which is Yusuf, is really kind and really merciful. So Yaqub trusts this scenario a little bit more than he trusts the scenario that the brothers came up with before with Yusuf. He trusts this situation a whole lot more. But even though that was the case, still he asked them, I will not allow you to take Binyamin unless you give me a promise. حَتَّى تُؤْتُونِ مَوْثِقًا مِّنَ اللَّهِ لَا تَأْتُنَّنِي بِهِ. That you will bring him back to me. And it's very beautiful the way he's wording this part of the verse. He's saying, you know what? Binyamin is so dear and near to my heart at this point. In the wording of the verse, he doesn't say, I will give you Binyamin as long as you promise to bring him back. He says, I will give you Binyamin لَتَأْتُنَّنِي بِهِ. As long as you promise me to bring him back to me. Right? That's because Binyamin was so dear and near to the heart of Yaqub. Now even more so than he was before Yusuf went missing. Maybe before he went missing, Yusuf or Yaqub had this love for both of them, and of course he loved Yusuf more. But now that Yusuf has not been around, that last thing that Yaqub is still holding on to is what? Is Binyamin. And that's why when he tells the brothers, he says what? He tells them, لَتَأْتُنَّنِي بِهِ. I will allow you to take Binyamin as long as you bring him right back where I am. This shows how near and dear Binyamin was to the heart of Yaqub. Little does Yaqub know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to test him again. He's going to keep Binyamin away from him also, the same way he kept Yusuf away from him as well. Okay, continuing. So he said, you have to bring him back to me, إِلَّا أَن يُحَاطَ بِكُمْ, unless it reaches a point where you have no choice. In other words, if a group of people come, they rob you, for example, they attack you and they take your younger brother, that's not a problem. I don't expect you to bring back Binyamin in that situation. That's not up to you. But other than that, I expect that Binyamin would be back with you. فَاللَّهُ عَلَى مَا نَقُولُ وَكِيلٌ. When they made that promise, then Yaqub said, okay, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is witnessing this moment, that you guys are all bearing witness that you're going to bring back Binyamin for me. Okay, moving on. وَقَالَ يَا بَنِيَّ. Before these brothers started to head back towards Egypt, then of course, there must have been a time period between the time that they came to Canaan and they had this conversation with Yaqub and the time that they're now going to head back. Of course, there must have been a gap between these two, but the Quran is skipping and moving on to the next time that they're going to go back to Egypt. Before they go back to Egypt, Yaqub alayhi salam has essentially some advice for them. وَقَالَ يَا بَنِيَّ لَا تَدْخُلُوا مِنْ بَابٍ وَاحِدٍ وَادْخُلُوا مِنْ أَبْوَابٍ مُتَفَرِّقَةٍ. He said, my children, when you guys go back to Egypt, there's one thing that you have to keep in mind. That when you go back to Egypt, please make sure that you do not all enter from the same gate. It is important that you enter from different gates. Okay. There is a lot of discussion amongst the Mufassirin as to why Yaqub alayhi salam chose this type of advice. Why is Yaqub telling his children to make sure that they don't all enter through the same gate, that they enter through multiple gates? There are a number of reasons that have been proposed. Some of them fall under the idea of the evil eye. Some have said it's because of the evil eye. Yaqub was worried that if all of his children went in all at once, people would look at them. They would essentially see how blessed this family is, and because of that, the evil eye would affect them. Some have said, some scholars say, no, it has nothing to do with the evil eye. It just has to do with the idea that if so many of these brothers were all entering through the same gate, that people would just feel jealous about them and would want to hurt them, would want to get rid of one or two of them. And some have proposed even other reasons. For example, some have said that because they were still looking for Yusuf alayhi salam, and Yaqub felt like Yusuf could have been in Egypt, in order to cover more ground, Yaqub said, when you enter into the city, do not enter through one gate, enter through multiple gates so that you are covering more ground. Maybe you run into Yusuf alayhi salam. There are multiple reasons out there. What we do know from this verse of the Quran, and what we can say for pretty much for sure, is that this verse does not prove the evil eye. This verse cannot be used as an argument to prove that the evil eye is a real thing. We might have other verses of the Quran that can prove such a thing, but this verse does not explicitly talk about the evil eye. The scholars even, there's a little bit of a dispute as to why Yaqub alayhi salam chose this reasoning. What we can agree on is that Yaqub was worried about his children. We know that for a fact. And that we know that Yaqub wanted to make sure that this family sticks together and they stay together. And that is why he's telling them to not all go through the same gates. Okay. So وَلَمَّا دَخَلُوا, I'm sorry, let me go back to these verses. وَقَالَ يَا بَنِيَّ لَا تَدْخُلُوا مِنْ بَابٍ وَاحِدٍ وَادْخُلُوا مِنْ أَبْوَابٍ مُتَفَرِّقَةٍ وَمَا أُغْنِي عَنْكُم مِّنَ اللَّهِ مِنْ شَيْءٍ إِنِ الْحُكْمُ إِلَّا لِلَّهِ. He said, listen, even if you act upon this advice of mine, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants something to happen to you, it will still happen to you. إِنِ الْحُكْمُ إِلَّا لِلَّهِ. He's the one who decides what's going to happen and what's not going to happen. عَلَيْهِ تَوَكَّلْتُ وَعَلَيْهِ فَلْيَتَوَكَّلِ الْمُتَوَكِّلُونَ. I am going to rely on Him, even though I'm telling you guys to take this precaution. But even though that is the case, still He may not want to protect you guys from harm. So I will just rely on Him. وَعَلَيْهِ فَلْيَتَوَكَّلِ الْمُتَوَكِّلُونَ. And on Him, the mutawakkilun are supposed to rely on. In other words, if anyone is going to rely on anything, they are to rely on who? They are to rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's the one who's worthy of you relying on Him. If you remember, we shared this hadith a while ago, that a person who comes and prays, and with this inshallah I'll wrap up the discussion, a person who comes and prays, when he comes and he prays, this person, he's supposed to be reminded of the idea that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala holds everything in His hands, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who has authority over everything in this world, And even though he's supposed to be reminded of that, sometimes he's not, because he's not paying attention to the prayer, or he doesn't really believe in the prayer. And because of that, he rushes through the prayer, and he moves on after the prayer, and he walks away. If you remember, we mentioned this hadith and shared this hadith a while ago, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala turns to his angels, and he says, look at my servant. Look at how he rushed through the prayer. And beyond that, look at how when the prayer ended, he did not take a moment to ask me for his hajat. He did not take a moment to ask me for his need. He had something that's bothering him. Instead of asking me, he rushed through the prayer, and he did not sit for a moment to talk to me about his problem. He walked away quickly so that he could solve his problem on his own. The hadith says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then says this. He says, doesn't he know that I'm the one who holds everything in my hands? He's not going to pray to me. He doesn't know that I'm the one who can solve his problem for him. He doesn't know that. This is what Yaqub is saying. وَعَلَيْهِ فَلْيَتَوَكَّلِ الْمُتَوَكِّلُونَ. If anyone is going to rely on anything, why not rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? He's the one who's worthy of you relying on him, because he's the one who holds the keys to the heavens and the earth. وَلِلَّهِ جُنُودُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. And for Allah are the enemies, or the armies I should say, of the heavens and the earth. Okay. وَلَمَّا دَخَلُوا مِنْ حَيْثُ أَمَرَهُمْ أَبُوهُم مَا كَانَ يُغْنِي عَنْهُم مِّنَ اللَّهِ مِنْ شَيْءٍ. When they actually entered through the gates, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that even though Yaqub alayhi salam wanted to protect them from the harm, and what was the harm? Making sure that they stick together, making sure that this family is all together. Even though Yaqub wanted to do that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala stopped that from happening. إِلَّا حَاجَةً فِي نَفْسِ يَعْقُوبَ قَضَاهَا. Except that because Yaqub wanted this to happen, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it happen in a different way. How did he make it happen in a different way? We'll talk about that next Friday, inshallah. How did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala go about essentially making this wish and this hope of Yaqub, which was what? That the family would stick together. How he made that happen. Because we know at the end of the story, the whole family, they came back together. And it's interesting that when this whole family came back together, at least as the brothers and Yaqub, none of them have passed away in these 20 or 30 years, which is pretty unlikely, because back in the day, 20 or 30 years, a lot of people would be born and a lot of people would have passed away. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had made his decree that this whole family would be gathered around one another at one point. They would essentially reconnect at one point. How did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make this happen? Inshallah, we'll talk about it in next week. And also, that critical moment when Yusuf alayhi salam reveals to his brothers that he is Yusuf. What can we learn from that moment? What can we learn from that critical moment where Yusuf unveils himself to his brothers and shares with them what he has learned throughout these 30 years? There's one lesson that Yusuf alayhi salam points out after these 20 or 30 years. Essentially, it's the one sentence he mentions when he tells them that I am Yusuf and this is my brother. This is my brother Binyamin. What is that one line? What is that one sentence? What is that one lesson that Yusuf alayhi salam has been able to extract from 30 years of pain? Says, this is the one line that I want you guys to walk away with. What is that one lesson that we can learn from Yusuf? We'll discuss that inshallah in the following week. Let's take a moment to recite Surah Fatiha for all of your marhumin and marhumat bin Nabi wa alih. Rahimallahu man qara al-Fatihata ma'a salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Maliki yawmiddin. Iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'in. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين.